So we started this mimer on Monday, a new mimer on Chanukah. And the mimer begins, as all mimarim do, with questions. A bunch of questions about Chanukah. That the Chanukah Menorah is based on the menorah in the temple. And so therefore we would expect them to be similar. Any discrepancies between them needs to be explained. So why is it that the Chanukah Menorah, in the time that it's lit, the place that it's lit, the number of candles that are lit, are all different to the temple? That the Temple Menorah was lit in daylight hours, whereas the Chanukah Menorah after sunset. The Chanukah Menorah is 8 candles, whereas the one in the temple was 7. The Chanukah Menorah is lit outside on the left side of the doorpost, whereas the Temple Menorah was on the right side, the southern end, inside the temple. So we explained all these things as being the same. There's one underlying thread between it, and that is that the Chanukah Menorah is about illuminating darkness, about actually getting into the territory of darkness and bringing light there. Unlike the Temple Menorah, which is about light in the place of goodness, the Chanukah Menorah is about bringing light into the place of evil, transforming and combating evil. So therefore, and that's because the whole festival of Chanukah is celebrating a victory over evil, where evil was transformed and overcome. The darkness of the Greek, the Hellenist philosophy that was coming to try and extinguish the holiness of Judaism was conquered, was beaten, was defeated. And so that is darkness being transformed into light, that being turned around. So therefore, the menorah is lit in the dark, not in the daytime, like the Temple Menorah. It's lit in the outside, the place of outsideness, which outside represents evil, the outside, not the inner circle, but the outer world. It's on the left side, which represents Gevurah, which is the source of evil, God's concealment. Wherever God is concealed, there's room for evil. And it's 8 candles, not 7, because 8 represents a power that is higher than Ishtalshus, higher than the system. 7 is nature, 8 is higher than nature, and only when you go higher than nature can you transform darkness to light. The Rebbe explained that the reason why Chanukah has this power of bringing a light that's higher than Ishtalshus is because Matisyahu and his children, the Asmoneans, the heroes of Chanukah, acted in a way of Mesiras Nefesh. Mesiras Nefesh means total self-sacrifice to, in an irrational, illogical, ridiculous way, go in the way of Hashem and fight Hashem's war, even when there's no logical reason why you'd be successful. That's called Mesiras Nefesh. And that is going above Hishtalshus in your own personality. Hishtalshus means acting normally, doing things that make sense. Going above Hishtalshus means being irrationally connected to Hashem, above Hishtalshus, above the system. Because they acted above the system, the miracle came from above the system, the number 8, all the way down into this world. The Rebbe ended with a question. So then, why is it specifically on Chanukah that we celebrate the miracle in such a way, and not Purim? Purim surely is a greater example of Mesiras Nefesh, because while on Chanukah there were 5 individuals, Matisyahu and his 4 sons, who had this Mesiras Nefesh. On Purim, the entire people, men, women, and children, the entire nation had Mesiras Nefesh. They had the option to drop their Judaism and survive, or remain proudly Jewish and be put to death. And they opted for the second, without exception. That's an entire nation of Mesiras Nefesh. Isn't that much greater than Matisyahu and his children, the small band having Mesiras Nefesh? And yet on Purim, we don't find any public outward displays of celebration. On Purim, you don't read the Megillah on the street. You do it in the shul. You don't have to go out and tell the world about it. You do it quite privately. Whereas on Chanukah, we publicize the miracle externally, outwardly, out in the world of darkness. Why? Because of the Mesiras Nefesh, the higher than Ishtalshus, that comes all the way down to the deepest, darkest place. Why is Purim any different? Yeah? That's what we ended with. We're now going to continue the Maimer on page Samaches, on the left side there, Gimel. It's at the very top of the page, Gimel. Hine. The idea that we said earlier, that the divine light that shone in the temple is called a revelation of Ishtalshus, a revelation of the light that fits into the world, not beyond the world, but fits into the world. And darkness is an opposition to that light. which Chanukah, we had to introduce a higher light to overcome that darkness. That is hu be'erech ha'er de Chanukah. That means, what we're saying is, when we say that the temple candles, that's only light of Ishtalshelus. That's not major light. That's light of Ishtalshelus. The light of Chanukah is a light that's higher than Ishtalshelus, and therefore has the power to illuminate darkness, far higher than the temple candles. So we're only belittling the light of the Beis Hamikdash, of the temple, in comparison to the light of Chanukah. Hu be'erech ha'er de Chanukah. But really, technically, the light that shone in the temple was also a light that came from higher than Ishtalshelus, against which no darkness can really oppose. Meaning, things are relative, and often in Chassidus it talks about different levels, where one level is far higher than the other one. But it's not that the other one's not so high, it's just that in comparison to this one. So the light of Chanukah is something that comes from so high that compared to that, the light of the temple is Ishtalshelus. That's like a part of creation. But if we would be not comparing it to Chanukah, if we would just be observing the temple compared to the rest of the world, the light in the temple was a light that came from higher than Ishtalshelus, compared to the rest of the world where there's a divine light that is very dim. As it's explained in a previous mimer, that the fact that the temple was built specifically by King Solomon, that it was King Solomon who built the temple, even though the design of the temple was put together by King David, David HaMelech, but he was not allowed to build it. It was built by his son Shlomo Melech. So why indeed? If King David was ready to build a temple and wanted to build a temple and designed the temple and had it all ready, so why didn't he build it? Why did only his son build it? So it's because what it says in the book Divrei Yomim, Chronicles, part of Tanakh, that Hashem says that no, King Solomon will build a temple because he is a man of peace. And there'll be peace and tranquility for the Jewish people in his days. So therefore he is the one who will build a temple for my name. Meaning, King David was a warrior. He had to fight wars. Whereas King Solomon had a time of peace at his time. So Hashem said that as righteous as King David is, he can't build a temple. Because to build the temple, you have to be a man of peace, not a man of war. And even though his wars were justified and necessary and holy, we're not talking about that he did something wrong, but still, King Solomon is the appropriate one to build the temple, not King David. We'll see why we're talking about this in a minute. And in all the nations were completely nullified and subjugated to King Solomon. Which is why there was peace. There was peace in his time because everyone was scared to touch Israel. King Solomon was so strong and Israel was such a superpower at the time that the surrounding nations made peace just out of intimidation, that they didn't want to mess. So why is that? It's because King Solomon had a level of holiness in his soul that represents the level of the king himself, Hashem's kingship, who is the master of all peace, that is so high that it's higher than Ishtalshelus. That when there's a light that's higher than Ishtalshelus that's revealed, all opposition is wiped out, is overwhelmed. In other words, the deeper reason why King Solomon had this power over the surrounding nations, that they could not oppose him, did not want to fight with him, and were nullified and bowed to him, the real reason why is because spiritually King Solomon had reached a level of holiness that he exuded a light that's higher than Ishtalshelus. And when the light that's higher than Ishtalshelus is revealed, there can be no opposition. What does that mean? That we know that this world is made up of a balance of good and evil. That's the design of this world. That there is a certain level of good energy in the world, but there's an opposition to that good energy, the powers of evil and darkness. And to maintain free choice and to maintain the challenge of life, it's necessary for this world to have this balance of good and evil. And so, how is there a balance of good and evil in the world? The divine light that is present in this world, that enlivens this world, is limited, is finite, is hidden to leave room for opposition. Right? If the light would be revealed in this world, if the godly light in this world would be totally revealed, then there'd be no opposition. You couldn't have evil. Evil cannot exist where Hashem's presence is felt and known. So this world has a limited divine light that is enough to keep it alive, and enough that we could detect the divine light in this world, but it's not too much that it should overwhelm evil in the world. Evil can exist, can thrive, can present a challenge to us. That's how this world is set up. But the light that is above Ishtalshalos, above this world, above the system, that is a light that is unbridled, unlimited, hasn't got any limitation to it. When that light would shine, there can be no opposition. Like we said in the previous Maimer that we learned, that you can have an inner struggle between your Yetzer Tov and Yetzer Hara, your divine soul, your animal soul, your inner spiritual life is a battle. But if you would connect to your soul as it is beyond yourself, beyond your body, so then there's no struggle. Then there's no opposition to that. So King Solomon, he was able to tap into the divine energy that is beyond Ishtalshalos, higher than this world. He represented a holiness that is beyond the struggle, that is higher than the limitations of the world. And so therefore, when he was king, there was no opposition to Israel. You can't oppose that level of holiness. So he's the one who built the temple. Because what is the temple? The temple is really a revelation of divine light from above this world, higher than Ishtalshalos. And so King Solomon, who represented a person on that level, he was the one who built the temple. King David did have opposition to him. There were wars. King Solomon had no opposition, which shows that his soul came from a higher place. So the Giluzah, the fourth last line of the paragraph, the Giluzah Shahir al Yeshloima Hayagam Lifnei Shivniv de Beis Hamikdash. That the truth is, this light that shone through King Solomon was even before he built the temple. And when he built the temple, it was even more revealed. The temple was a building down here in this world that revealed this unbelievable light from higher than Ishtalshalos, than above this world. And so it was simply not possible to oppose King Solomon. Why? Because he's represented a holiness that can't be fought with, can't be messed with. So that's really what the temple is, and we're introducing King Solomon just to illustrate the point that the temple represents a light that is higher than Ishtalshalos. V'afal piken, but nevertheless, legabe hagili de Chanukah, in comparison to the revelation that's brought down on Chanukah, the revelation of the Beis Hamikdash would be considered Ishtalshalos.
So it's a
Relative. That compared to the world, the Beis Hamikdash was higher than Ishtalshalos. But compared to Chanukah, the light that was drawn down in the story of Chanukah and every year in Chanukah, the light of the Beis Hamikdash, that's worldly light. That's limited light in comparison. Yeah? So, which is unbelievable thought. That means that when we light the menorah in Bondi, Sydney, New South Wales, now, today, when we light the menorah in Chanukah, we are connecting to a light that is higher than the light that was generated through the temple in Jerusalem. That's a unbelievable thought. In fact, the fact that we're lighting the menorah in Bondi is the proof that it's a higher light. The light of the Beis Hamikdash could only be lit in the Beis Hamikdash. You can't light the Temple Menorah outside of the temple. Even down the road from the temple, you can't. It has to be lit in the temple. Whereas the menorah of Chanukah, you can light here. What does that indicate? That it's a light that can reach the furthest place. It's not limited. It can illuminate this place. The Temple Menorah had to be in the temple. It represented light where light belongs. Whereas the Chanukah Menorah represents light that goes into the territory of darkness and illuminates it. So when we're lighting the menorah, we're lighting a candle, a light, a divine energy we're creating that makes the temple light look like Ishtalshalos. Not that it is Ishtalshalos. Really, the temple light is higher than Ishtalshalos. It's just that, compared to Chanukah, it looks like Ishtalshalos. So v'tzarech bir, what we need to explain, if really both the light of the temple and the light of Chanukah are really both higher than Ishtalshalos, so what's really the difference between them? What is really the difference between the light that is drawn down in the temple and the light that's drawn down on Chanukah? That makes one of them so much higher than the other that it makes the other one look like Ishtalshalos, even though they're both really lights that are higher than Ishtalshalos. What's really the difference between them? That the Maimar is going to have to explain. So let's shelve that question for now. That will be explained in the course of the Maimar. How could it be that the Chanukah light so far surpasses the temple light that it makes it look like worldly light, when really both of them are higher than Ishtalshalos? What's really the difference? That we'll explain. The next paragraph. But Gam Tzarech Bir. Another thing we need to explain. In another issue that is quoted, we quoted in other previous Maimer, we said earlier, quoting the Friedrich Rebbe's Maimer, that the reason why the timing of the lighting of the Chanukah menorah is specifically after the sun sets is why?
So it lights the dark.
Because the power of the Chanukah menorah is to illuminate darkness. That's what we said. Now, this needs to be explained. But on the surface, the idea that the light of the Chanukah candles illuminate darkness, that happens because, how's that symbolized? The fact that the candles are shining when it is dark. Right? It's dark outside and the candles are on. That's illuminating darkness. But why does the lighting of the candles have to be after dark? You get the question? You could light the candles when it's still light. As long as they stay lit when it's dark, it illuminates the darkness. Which is what happened in the temple. The temple candles were lit before sunset, but they stayed alight after sunset. That's illuminating darkness. Why can't you do that on Chanukah as well? Remember, when the rabbis made a decree, they made it to parallel a Torah mitzvah. If the mitzvah of lighting the Chanukah menorah in the temple was in the daytime and it stayed lit at dark, so that we would expect that the mitzvah of Chanukah candles should also be lit in the day and staying lit in the dark. And if you're going to tell me, well, no, that's not going to work, because the Chanukah menorah is all about illuminating the darkness. So why doesn't it illuminate? It's still illuminating the darkness. Just because you lit it during the day, does that make it any less illuminating the darkness? As long as it's still shining at night, that's fine. Whereas we find with Chanukah, no, specifically you have to light it when it's dark already. What's that point? What's the idea behind that? Why you have to specifically light it at darkness? Not just it should be lit in the darkness, but it should be lit during the darkness. The lighting itself should happen in the darkness. What's that about? Well, there's a similar thing we need to explain. The same applies with the placing of the menorah. What do we say? Where's the menorah placed? Outside, as opposed to the temple, which was inside, the Temple Menorah. Why? What was our explanation?
To take it to the place of darkness.
Right, so
To
we're
light
actually
it in
taking
the
it
pla-
into the place of darkness, the outside, the foreign outside world that's not a part of the oneness of God, and to bring light there. So what's the question going to be?
Why?
That summarizes it. Yeah. Yeah.
Why?
Well, why not? Well, we said why. The reason why you light it outside is because we're trying to bring light to the outside world, the world that is...
Because if you lit it inside, the light's still visible outside. So
Right.
why do you have to actually physically place it outside?
Yeah, exactly. Just like we said with time, you could say with place. That you could light the menorah inside and it could illuminate the outside. If it's such a bright light, it shouldn't matter where it is.
Yeah. So why does it have to be physically?
You have to
outside?
actually light it outside. It does the job if you light it inside, just like the temple menorah was lit inside, but it illuminates out. So why the specifically taking it to the outside? These are questions I don't know if we would have come up with these questions ourselves, but it's taking it to a deeper level of understanding. So let's look at the words of that question. So the same question on the fourth line. The same question applies to the placing of the menorah. We said the reason why you're putting the menorah outside is because the whole point is to illuminate the street, the outside world, the Rosh Hashanah, the place of disunity. But the Lechura, it doesn't seem to make sense. The same question. If these candles of Chanukah are really a light that is higher than Ishtalshlus, higher than any limitation, this infinitely powerful light, bilti mugbal. So harigamba im hayubifnim. If an infinite light was put inside, it would certainly be able to reach the street. If it's so unlimited. If it's an unlimited light, unlimited means no limits. So put it inside, it'll still shine outside. If it's a limited light, so then you've got to be where you want the light to be. But if you've got an unlimited light, what does it matter where it is? So again, because we're basing the lighting of the menorah of Chanukah on the lighting of the menorah in the temple, and the temple menorah was lit inside, so you would expect the Chanukah menorah to also be lit inside. And if you're going to say, well, it's got to illuminate the outside, it will, because it's unlimited light. It'll reach the outside as well.
Because back to what you were saying, the light in the temple would have illuminated the outside because it was in itself an unlimited light.
Yeah, not as much as Chanukah, because the Chanukah menorah is higher than Ishtalshlus, higher than the Ishtalshlus of the temple menorah.
No, but in its own sense, without comparing them, it would have.
Yeah, yeah. Which it does say. It says that idea about the temple menorah, that it shone to the outside. Just the Chanukah menorah would be even more.
Yeah.
But it shouldn't be a problem, it shouldn't be an issue having it inside.
So it's a stronger question, in other words, that why we place it outside, because it's a stronger light.
Yeah. Yeah. Ubifrat, just after the brackets there, halfway down the paragraph. Ubifrat lefi mashnis bola el b'dermas shalom. Specifically, when we consider something that's explained in a previous mimer, be'inyan achiluk ben habirud al dei giluy she'er b'mishkan la birush al dei giluy she'er b'meseh mikdash. There's an issue that's discussed about comparing the power of the temple as compared to the tabernacle, the Mishkan and the Beis HaMikdash. The Mishkan was the temporary sanctuary that traveled with the Jewish people through the desert, which was the precursor to the temple, which was a permanent building in Yerushalayim. And so it's discussed in Chassidus that each of these buildings brought holiness to the place they were in. The idea of a sanctuary is to create a holy space. And so the sanctuary that was temporary, the Mishkan, and the permanent sanctuary, which was the temple, the Beis HaMikdash, both of them brought holiness and elevated the space that it occupied, but in different ways. There is a difference between a Mishkan and a Beis HaMikdash. What's the difference? that the elevation that the Mishkan brought was an elevation that happened in a way of combat, of like a war. Meaning, the idea that the Mishkan, the tabernacle, traveled through the desert, meant that as it traveled along, it elevated the sparks of holiness that were hidden in the desert. But in a way that the Mishkan was a contradiction to the place that it was in. The desert represents a place that is devoid of life, devoid of holiness, and the Mishkan is this holy space that was built in the desert. So it was sort of like forcing, it was like imposing holiness in a place of unholiness. That was the way the Mishkan created holiness in the space that it occupied. But the temple was different. The temple was in a way of rest, in a settled way it elevated the sparks of holiness. Specifically, when King Solomon built the temple, because of his nature, we said earlier that he was the man of peace. King Solomon sat in Jerusalem. The temple was settled in Jerusalem, and the sparks of holiness came to him. They were attracted to him on their own. Meaning what? Let's explain. What's the main difference between the tabernacle in the desert and the temple in Jerusalem? So the main difference is one of them was collapsible and mobile, and the other one was a permanent structure that stayed where it was. Right? That the Mishkan was this tent that you built in a place, stayed there for a while, and then disassembled, packed it up in the backpack, and moved on to the next place, and then set it up again. Whereas the temple was a fixed building in a set place that didn't move. What does that mean? Each of these buildings were bringing holiness into the world. Were a space of holiness. Which one is more powerful? Which one brings greater holiness?
Just having a guess, but it seems like the temple was in Israel, in Jerusalem, so that seems easier because the what was the other one? The Mishkan is in the darkest place.
Right. So
it's got to be from a higher place.
Right. So the Mishkan brought holiness to a desert, whereas the temple was in a holy city. It was already in a state of holiness. So on the one hand, you would say that the power of the Mishkan is much greater. The Mishkan went around from place to place, wherever you put it, and it created a holy space there. It didn't matter where, which part of the desert, which corner of the desert, no matter how unholy or whatever darkness there is, the Mishkan is there and is bringing holiness. Whereas the temple was in a comfortable, holy space as it was, which sounds less challenging to bring holiness there than to bring it to the outside. On the other hand, there's something about the temple that was even more powerful than the Mishkan. For the Mishkan to elevate the world, you had to take the Mishkan to the world. The temple had the power that it drew the world to it. It's described in Tanakh that when the temple stood and King Solomon was the king, kings, queens, leaders of all the world came to Jerusalem to bow to King Solomon. They nullified themselves to him. They brought tribute to him. They said, we want to be on your team. So what that means is that the temple had a drawing, attractive power, that the holiness was so intense that the sparks of holiness that had been lost came automatically, were drawn to it. It was like this vortex of holiness that just sucked everything into it. Like you couldn't stay away. which denotes an even higher holiness. That it's a holiness that doesn't need to go to the place of unholiness to elevate it. It can just stay where it is, and it's got such like a gravitational pull that it drew all the surrounding elements to it to elevate it. So in that way, the temple is even higher, even more powerful.
Was it drawing like darkness to elevate it, or just
it was people, kings who were enemies of the Jewish people became allies of the Jewish people. Why? Not because King Solomon went and breathed down their neck and threatened them. King Solomon just sat in his palace. The temple stood in Jerusalem, and people just came. They were drawn to the holiness, so they became allies. So it was turning around darkness
by just being
just being there. So in that way, the temple was far more powerful than the Mishkan. So, if the Mishkan was a holiness that could elevate darkness, but you had to take it there, you had to schlep it to the place, whereas the temple was even holier than that it could sit where it was, and it just drew in everything and overwhelmed the darkness just by sitting there. So, fourth last line of the page. So then how much more is the power of the lights of Chanukah? We said that Chanukah is so powerful that the lights of Chanukah are even higher than the light of the temple. So if the temple, which is higher than the Mishkan, could sit where it was and draw holiness to it and overcome the darkness by inviting the darkness into it, certainly the Chanukah candles, which are even more powerful than the temple, should be able to be lit in your house, where you are, sit there. You don't need to go out to the darkness. You can stay where you are, and that will bring the light. In other words, based on our understanding of the comparison between the Mishkan and the Beis HaMikdash, we understand that sitting where you are, not having to go out into the darkness, is an advantage, not a disadvantage. The more powerful your light, the less you need to bring it to the outside. I mean, the same with just physical light. If you've got a really bright light, you can sit here and it'll illuminate the whole area. If your light is not so light, you have to take it around. You know, when we search for chametz on the night before Pesach with a little candle, so if you want to look under the table, you have to go under the table with the candle to look. You have to go into the corners with the candle, which is the idea, by the way. That's the whole point. If you would have just the lights on, you don't have to take the light. A big light up in the sky can illuminate the entire room. So the more powerful the light, the less movement. It doesn't need to be transported. It can stay where it is and it'll bring light everywhere. So if the temple had that power, the Beis HaMikdash could sit where it was and bring light to the surroundings, how much more should Chanukah have that power that it can stay inside and it'll illuminate the street? That we should understand that the fact that the lights of Chanukah can illuminate darkness of the street is not through going down into that darkness to illuminate it. It should automatically happen that there's such a powerful light that the street is automatically illuminated without having to go into it. So why is it then? It's even less understood now. That Chanukah, you specifically go outside and light it on the outside. Why? Why are we doing that? We shouldn't have to. It's such an intense light. It should be enough to leave it inside and the light in the outside. So this and all the questions we've asked will, God willing, be explained as the Maimar continues.